From MTN News, this is Montana This Morning.
An exonerated Montana man files the first claim for compensation under a new law. We have the details of that coming up.
I'm Joe St. George on Capitol Hill. Coming up, we take a closer look at the semiconductor shortage worldwide and how it's impacting your life and what Congress may or may not do about it.
Well, that's encouraging, Joe. Thank you very much. 6:31 here on
happy Monday.
Well, it's so disheartening in there.
It is. Hey, something, as much as I hate to say snow, is good, it is
great.
Fabulous to be able to
it
see a little bit of snow on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
From a weather standpoint, not a driving standpoint. That's a wholly different thing.
Story, yeah.
Temperatures this morning into the teens for most of us. We do have some driving concerns out there. Snow and ice on a few area roadways, especially the passes down the Gallatin Canyon. Those all reporting scattered snow and ice at the very least. Daytime temperatures back into the 30s. There's another chance of snow as you head into the evening. That could be a bigger impact as you head into the overnight or evening and overnight hours. We'll talk about that and more coming up in just a couple of minutes.
6:31, your statement about snow, I'm going to tell you right now why it was completely accurate. Firefighters in Butte continue to monitor a wildfire that was reported Saturday afternoon southeast of the town in the East Ridge. TN's John Amy was there, gives us some details about the fire.
Several fire crews are battling a wildfire in steep terrain that was reported Saturday afternoon in a remote area southeast of Butte. The wildfire is located in a very remote area off of Blacktail Canyon Road. Firefighters had a difficult time accessing the fire.
It's pretty rugged country up there. Not able to get any vehicles or even four-wheelers in there. They had to hike in the whole way.
There are some homes in the area, and fire crews are using hand tools to make fire breaks to remove fuels so that the fire can't spread.
On the uphill side, there's really not much trouble it can get into for quite a ways. But, if it starts coming down this way, then that's more of an issue, too.
One resident who has a home very close to the fire said he was surprised to see a wildfire this late in the year.
I've lived up here for 30 years or so, and this has never crossed my mind before. In the summer, of course, but not now.
The gusty winds here in Butte are also a cause for concern for the safety of the firefighters at the scene.
That's actually what my job is just kind of keeping an eye on things to make sure that the wind doesn't all of a sudden change on them, and so I can tell them to get the heck out of there if it's, something does happen.
In Butte, John Amy, MTN News.
All right, thank you, John. 6:33. In other news this morning, a man who was exonerated from a rape conviction after spending more than a decade in prison is the first person to file a claim under a new state law to compensate the wrongfully convicted in Montana. But he's not exactly pleased with the process. MTN's Mike Dennison has more.
A man who was exonerated from a rape conviction in Missoula after spending more than a decade in prison is the first person to file a claim under a new state law to compensate the wrongfully convicted in Montana. But he's not exactly pleased with the process. Cody Marble was exonerated in 2017, 15 years after being convicted for a jailhouse rape in Missoula that, from the beginning, he said never happened. Now he's filed a claim under a new state law that could lead to an award of as much as $800,000. But Marble says the law underwent some last-minute changes at the 2021 legislature that he thinks unduly burdens people who've already spent years in prison for crimes they never committed. To file a claim, Marble had to drop his civil lawsuit against Missoula County and the state and the prosecutors who put it behind bars. He also must go through another entire trial process to show his innocence, even though he's been exonerated by a court. As he put it, those who made the changes wanted to protect the state and were protecting everyone but the person who was wrongfully convicted. Marble filed his claim in late September in State District Court in Missoula. The State Justice Department and Missoula County will be defending the state against Marble's claim. The law says a successful claimant can get $60,000 a year for every year he or she was wrongfully imprisoned, $25,000 for every year they were on probation or parole, and 2 years of tuition assistance to a state college. Marble was convicted in 2002 and spent much of his time behind bars until he was released from prison in early 2016. The law also says a claimant must get a $5,000 transition assistance grant from the State Corrections Department within 30 days of their release from prison. But the department told MTN News that Marble isn't eligible for that money because it's only for people released from prison after the law took effect. Reporting from Helena, Mike Dennison, MTN News.
In other news, it's something we've been following for months, issues with the supply chain and how it might impact your holiday shopping. While the president said last week that the shelves will not be empty this Christmas, his administration admitting they have work to do when it comes to another shortfall in the country, computer chips. Our Joe St. George with a closer look at the chip shortage and what Congress may or may not be able to do about it in the coming weeks.
They are tiny, but these chips can impact an economy. We're talking about semiconductors. What are they? Perhaps the Semiconductor Industry Association describes it best on their website as, quote, the brains of modern electronics, allowing the technology in everything from your car to your child's toys to work. By now, you have likely heard of the semiconductor shortage and how the lack of chips is impacting supplies. Take, for instance, an electric car. The Secretary of Commerce said last week these cars use around 2,000 different chips. That's double the number used in a non-electric car. It's one reason why there are vehicle buying delays nationwide. Listen to what Michigan's Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens said during a meeting last week on the issue. The chip shortage is estimated to have cost the auto industry over $200 billion this year.
We're talking about the most critical issue to Michigan right now.
The problem is not a new one, and Congress has been debating addressing it for months. The problem? There hasn't been much action. The CHIPS Act is one possible solution, though. It passed the Senate with Democratic and Republican votes in June, but it has since stalled in the House, with some members there wanting to write their own version of the bill instead. The legislation the Senate passed creates a national semiconductor technology center and invests over $50 billion to create more chips here in the U.S. Currently, our country only makes around 12% of the global chip supply. Now, it is possible the CHIPS Act gets a final vote this year, but the clock is ticking, and Congress so far has not made this their top priority. Of course, passing the legislation wouldn't solve the problem overnight. It would take years for many chip-making factories to be built in the U.S. In Washington, I'm Joe St. George.
In international headlines this morning, Japan retracting a ban on international flights. It originally requested to ban incoming flight bookings from other countries as a way to prevent the spread of the Omicron variant. The ban's supposed to go to the end of December, but now Japan's transport ministry says the ban was criticized for being too strict. Japan will continue to leave its border open to international visitors. And we're watching in real time as countries implement stricter precautions as Omicron spreads. But in countries with travel bans, experts are skeptical, raising the question of whether governments can keep borders open for tourism and limit the spread. Newsy's Jane Packard takes a look at the issue.
I wouldn't shut down tourism. I don't think that's a major way of handling this.
Experts skeptical that travel restrictions will slow the Omicron variant, as the first case pops up in the U.S. and countries around the world impose light lockdowns.
What, we're 3 years in now? Almost, and it's still happening.
Blanket travel bans will not prevent the international spread of Omicron, and they place a heavy burden on lives and livelihoods.
Despite the WHO standing against travel bans, President Biden standing behind restrictions on entry to the U.S. from South Africa.
It's going week to week here to determine what we need and what the state of affairs. We're going to learn a lot more in the next couple weeks about the lethality of this virus.
We call on all countries to take rational, proportional risk reduction measures in keeping with international health regulations, such as screening of passengers prior to traveling and or upon arrival.
The restrictions worrying for a tourism industry that was just starting to get back on its feet after more than a year of brutal cuts to flight schedules and hotel bookings.
That's a good sound.
But in Palm Beach County, Florida, Glenn Jurgensen is bullish.
I think everybody's very optimistic that the season's going to be great.
Florida's governor refusing shutdowns and warm weather inviting outdoor activity.
There's like no availability in terms of short-term rentals down here, so they got booked up early. I think people are looking for that escape.
And while U.S. airlines conservatively add back to reduced international schedules, operators overseas are already feeling the pinch. UK-based EasyJet saying the new variant already appears to be denting bookings. But with a lot of uncertainty about Omicron's severity and ability to evade vaccines, the dips aren't as bad as before. And with more information, leaders may be willing to stay the course, allowing travel and managing the next wave.
We have to do common sense measures like we have been.
Screening passengers as they come in, imposing quarantine for some, and
wear a mask and social distance when you're in large groups.
James Packard, Newsy, Los Angeles.